welcome to an Australian great in Michael Hooper. Thank you for coming to have a chat with us. Debriefing on Australia. There were one or two unknowns about Australia coming into this one. Where are you emotionally post-match relative to where you were emotionally pre-game?
Well, I think a bit like most of the Australian supporters, just a bit flat. I think the game was very dominant in the first half by the Lions, as you saw on that momentum graph. The Wallabies coming home late and I think showed some really good signs and maybe a bit of a blueprint of what they need to play 80 minutes of in Melbourne next week. So a little bit flat, excited by some really positive signs. But it was an interesting lead up to the game. I think the players that they picked, the team that Joe decided to go with was always going to be interesting. So it was really a learning experience for me sitting there tonight and trying to work out what this team's trying to do.
With hindsight, if, as you say, a bit of test and learn tonight, is that a missed opportunity or is that actually very valuable now heading into Melbourne?
Oh, of course it's going to be valuable. This team's two games into their season. The Lions are well versed on where they are at this point in time. I think it's going to be very interesting to see who they roll out on Tuesday night and then Saturday next week. And it's going to be interesting what the Wallabies do. They had a new 10 in Tom Liner starting tonight. Do they roll him out again for next week? I would like to see him get another chance. I'd hate to see too many changes come in from the Wallabies. But there was a few omissions due to injury, due to speculation, or Will Skelton, a Bobby Valentini, who just gives the Wallabies just some really good free go forward. So it'll be interesting to see if they come back in.
How close do you think they are? And is it almost a case of taping them up and saying, give us whatever you possibly can, given the size and the physicality that they will bring?
Well, I think Willie is fit.
Yeah.
But they look like the Wallabies seem to go with a different profile of player, particularly in their forwards was a work rate, attritional-based team. Not the power game that we know that someone like a Willie and a Bobby Valentini can bring. So if we see them come back in, that changes the dynamic of the forward pack a fair bit. So really interested to see what selection will be. What
did you make of Australia, particularly in the last 10, 15, 20 minutes or so, and how much of a concern, how much of a stone in the shoe will that be for Andy Farrell?
Well, like Michael said, they kind of put a little bit of a blueprint in terms of, I thought Tate McDermott was excellent when he came on. I thought he brought some real zip to the game in terms of testing around the fringes. He brought his forwards into play a little bit of that sort of pick and go. It stopped when you pick and go against a team, you stop the line speed, and the Lions line speed all tour has just been in your face, shutting things down, and that sort of got to Tom Liner a little bit tonight, didn't he? He looked a little bit lost, but I have to say, that's as disappointed as I've been from a Wallabies team in quite a while. You think of Joe Schmidt teams and you think how organised they are after 2 or 3 phases. The first 2 or 3 phases are you're on the money, everything is absolutely crisp. And tonight I felt really sorry for Tom Liner because it looked as if they were they looked really clunky tonight, Rog, didn't they, in terms of their first couple of phases?
Yeah, I think probably the greatest mystery for me was with 8 points between the teams. I thought there was a gulf in class between the teams. And
so what does that tell you? Is that the Lions 50 minutes saying let's concentrate on Melbourne? Is that Australia working out?
No, not at all like that. I just think it's there's a lot of fight in the dog of Australians. I think you've got to recognise that, but I also got to think that with a little bit more accuracy, I think you put away the tries. There was opportunities near the line in the first half to kill the game. I think that will probably be the one word that's plastered around their team room for the week would be ruthlessness. So they need to establish that. I think the spine of their team is different to what the Australians can propose. This is such a steep learning ground for Tom Liner. It's not really a series to let a youngster succeed and creating conditions around that for a young kid to succeed. But this is I suppose the brutal side of professional sport, and he'll be better, and I think he's a quick learner, but he needs to be better and his team needs to be better. There was phases there we were looking at the game where the only option he had was static forwards. There was no option to play behind their back or play at the width because probably the shape of his teammates had let him down.
But Rog, would he not be better if he has a Valentini, a Skelton, a Tupou in the team, a bit more firepower to get him on the front? But we know what it's like when you're playing 9 and 10 behind a team which is getting beaten up, which the Wallabies were in that first 20-25 minutes. It doesn't matter if you've got Dan Carter or Tom Liner in the seat. The other side, you're up against it, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but the other side of that too, I think, is that when you bring back in players that have been out for a period of time with injury, you got to have the other guys carrying the load. So if you're looking for Will to be the big player, you won't get that first game back. Will is a little bit like Tyg Furlong in the fact that 5 times 50 minutes, then he becomes really interesting. Yeah, he's a freak and he can play next week without a shadow of a doubt. He could go 80 potentially. But as Michael said, his game is a power game. He's a north-south player. There's not much space north-south when you're going against the Lions D between number 1 and 5 defenders, because they're just ready to get off the line and hit.
I want to ask you about what we're going to get in Melbourne from the Wallabies in just a moment. But how do you break down the Wallabies tonight? What impressed you? What concerns you?
I think concern was the lack of detail in their attack. I think the rugby's pretty straightforward when you get going forward, and you saw that. There were times, second phase where Tom Liney gets given the ball and they've not gone forward. And that lack of cohesion, that lack of alignment, connectivity, whatever you want to call it. And you're wondering whether that's an inexperienced thing or that's we're not understanding how we're trying to move the team around the pitch, because it's the first game of their season. They looked really dangerous in the autumn. They looked really slick, ball in hand. You saw the Tom Wright, Swali, these guys in space. And we didn't see that until the last 20 minutes. So I think there's an element of, you get into the game because of error from the Lions, a bit of ill discipline, forcing the ball a little bit. But the fact that didn't come until 50, 60, 70 minutes, and I think the Lions contained them really well with line speed. So I think there's crumbs there of hope around, how do we be more direct? How do we use the pick and go game? How do we use the power game? But can we use the power game if we don't have, like Michael's point, we don't have the Valentinis, the Will Skeltons of the world?
Okay, well, we'll see what the team selection looks like. But knowing the players as you do and knowing Joe Schmidt as you do, what reaction do you expect, having seen the 80 minutes tonight in Melbourne, 100,000 MCG? I mean, it's all there for Australian rugby if it wants it. What reaction do you expect?
How good's that going to be? 100,000 down in Melbourne. That's a stadium that we don't play as a rugby team on too often. So for the players that get to take the field, it's going to be a remarkable experience. Joe, listening to his interview after the match, seemed upset. He wasn't happy with the proximity of players receiving the ball. They looked jumbled, and that would really frustrate Joe. His attention to detail, his ability to go deep into analysis, I think sometimes very deep, how I hear it. So he'll be upset that they weren't able to execute that with the time they've had in camp. So that'll be a frustration for him, and they'll get on top of that, I think, tomorrow. They've got to get down to Melbourne, but they don't have time to waste. This is going to be a grand final. So what mentality do they need to take into next week? It is grand final. It's throw everything at it. But I would like to see some continuity in the selections. You've picked a team. You've backed a certain team. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.